Welcome to Story of the Black Past, the place where forgotten history, strange mysteries, and hidden stories come back to life. Before we begin today's incredible story, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Write your city, your country, and the time you are watching. We truly enjoy seeing viewers from around the world. If you have not already done so, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your support helps us continue uncovering powerful stories like this one. Thank you for being here with us. Now stay with us until the very end, because the story you are about to hear is one that puzzled doctors, scientists, and entire communities for many years. Tonight we travel back to the year 1867 to the strange and troubling case of a boy many people believed science could not explain. In the quiet countryside of Tennessee in the United States, a small farming town lived a slow and predictable life. Most families worked the land. Days began early with the rising sun and ended when darkness spread across the hills. Life was simple, and mysteries were rare. But in the year 1867, something happened in that quiet town that would soon draw the attention of doctors, ministers, and curious visitors from miles away. At the center of the story was a boy named Timothy Caldwell. Timothy was born into a modest farming family. His father, Samuel Caldwell, worked long days tending crops and raising animals. His mother, Ruth Caldwell, cared for the household and their 3 children. Timothy was the youngest of the family. At first, nothing about the boy seemed unusual. But as Timothy began to grow, his parents noticed something strange. The boy rarely slept. At first, they believed it was only a phase common in young children. But weeks turned into months, and Timothy still seemed able to stay awake far longer than any normal child. His mother watched him closely at night. While the rest of the household slept, Timothy often sat quietly by the window staring out into the darkness. Sometimes he would whisper to himself, though no one could hear what he was saying. Samuel Caldwell believed his wife was worrying too much. But soon other strange things began happening. Timothy started speaking about events that had not yet happened. One evening during supper, he calmly told his parents that their neighbor's barn would catch fire the following night. His father scolded him for making foolish claims. But the next night the barn burned. The fire had started suddenly when a lantern was knocked over. People in the town began whispering about the Caldwell boy. At first the family tried to ignore the rumors. Yet Timothy continued saying things that later came true. He told his mother that a traveling merchant would arrive in town before sunset on a day when no one expected visitors. Hours later, a wagon rolled down the dusty road carrying a merchant who had lost his way. He told his older brother to stay away from the river because the bridge would collapse. 2 days later, the old wooden bridge broke during heavy rain. These events slowly spread through the community. Neighbors began visiting the Caldwell home, hoping to see the strange boy for themselves. Some believed Timothy possessed a gift. Others believed something darker was happening. One local doctor, a man named Dr. William Hargrove, became especially interested in the case. Dr. Hargrove had studied medicine in Nashville and prided himself on being a man of science. When he first heard the rumors about Timothy Caldwell, he dismissed them as superstition. But curiosity eventually brought him to the Caldwell farm. The doctor spent several hours observing the boy. Timothy appeared calm and polite. He answered questions clearly and showed no signs of illness. Yet something about the boy made the doctor uneasy. During the visit, Dr. Hargrove asked Timothy a simple question. He asked the boy if he knew why people believed he was unusual. Timothy looked at the doctor quietly. Then he gave an answer that shocked everyone in the room. The boy said that people feared what they could not understand. But he also said that the doctor himself would soon face a problem no medicine could solve. Dr. Hargrove laughed at this strange remark. Yet only a week later, the doctor's horse threw him from a wagon, leaving him with an injury that troubled him for months. The story of Timothy Caldwell spread quickly across neighboring counties. Some visitors came out of curiosity. Others came seeking answers about their future. Timothy did not speak much, but when he did, people listened. Yet the boy's life was not peaceful. The attention placed a heavy burden on his family. Samuel Caldwell worried that the rumors might bring trouble. In those days, strange abilities often caused fear among deeply religious communities. A local minister visited the Caldwell home and warned the family to be careful. He believed the boy's abilities might not come from God. The minister insisted that Timothy should spend more time in prayer and less time speaking about the future. But the boy remained quiet during the visit. As the months passed, Timothy's strange behavior continued. He rarely slept more than a few minutes at a time. His mother sometimes woke in the middle of the night to find him sitting upright in bed with his eyes open. When she asked what he was doing, Timothy simply said he was listening. Listening to what? The boy never explained. Dr. Hargrove returned several times to study the case more carefully. He measured the boy's pulse and breathing. He tested Timothy's memory and reflexes. But every examination showed the same result. Physically, the boy appeared completely normal. Yet the strange predictions continued. Eventually, the doctor admitted something he had never said before in his medical career. He could not explain Timothy Caldwell. By the end of 1867, the quiet farming town had become known across the region because of the mysterious boy. Visitors traveled long distances hoping to meet him. Some left convinced that Timothy possessed a rare and unexplained ability. Others believed the stories were exaggerated. But one thing was certain. The boy had changed the peaceful rhythm of the town forever. And what would happen next in Timothy Caldwell's life would leave an even deeper mystery behind. A mystery that people would continue discussing long after the boy himself was gone. The months following the first rumors about Timothy Caldwell were unlike anything the small Tennessee town had ever experienced. What had once been a quiet farming community slowly turned into a place filled with whispers, suspicion, and curiosity. Wagons from neighboring towns began appearing on the dusty road that led to the Caldwell farm. Some visitors came with hopeful faces, believing the strange boy might reveal something about their future. Others arrived with fear in their eyes, unsure whether the stories they had heard were blessings or warnings. Samuel Caldwell grew increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. He was a simple farmer who had never wanted his family to stand out from the rest of the community. Each time strangers appeared at his gate asking questions about Timothy, Samuel felt the uneasy weight of something he could not control. Ruth Caldwell worried even more. She had begun noticing changes in her son. Timothy was becoming quieter. He spent long hours staring into the distance, sometimes watching the sky as if he were waiting for something. When his mother asked what he was thinking about, he often replied with only a few strange words. Sometimes he said that time moved differently for him. His mother did not understand what he meant. One evening during the early autumn of 1867, something happened that changed the way the entire town viewed the boy. The Caldwell family was eating supper when Timothy suddenly stopped speaking. His eyes turned toward the window even though nothing appeared outside. After several long seconds, he spoke. His voice sounded calm but distant. He told his father that a terrible storm would come during the night. Samuel looked outside. The sky was clear. The air was still. There were no clouds. The farmer shook his head and told the boy to finish his meal. But Timothy continued staring at the window. He quietly added another sentence. He said the storm would take the Miller family's house. The Miller family lived about 2 miles away, near the edge of a wooded valley. Samuel grew irritated and ordered Timothy to stop saying such things. The boy lowered his head and said nothing more for the rest of the evening. That night, the Caldwell family went to sleep as usual. Just after midnight, the wind began to rise. At first, it sounded like a distant whisper moving through the trees. Then the whisper turned into a violent roar. Rain began crashing against the roof of the house. Samuel woke suddenly and rushed to the window. Lightning flashed across the sky, revealing a dark funnel forming in the distance. The storm struck quickly. The powerful winds tore through the valley with terrifying force. By morning, the countryside looked completely different. Trees had been uprooted, fences were broken, fields were scattered with debris. But the most shocking sight was near the valley. The Miller family's house had been destroyed. The storm had ripped the building apart during the night. Fortunately, the Miller family had survived after taking shelter in a cellar beneath the house. But their home was gone. News of the storm and Timothy's warning spread across the town faster than anything before. People were now divided into two groups. Some believed the boy had been given a rare gift. Others believed something far more dangerous was involved. The local minister became deeply concerned. He began speaking openly during church gatherings about the dangers of unknown powers. He warned his congregation that the devil often worked through mysterious ways that could confuse people. Many families began whispering about Timothy Caldwell during their prayers. Meanwhile, Dr. Hargrove continued his visits. The doctor had become more fascinated with the boy than ever before. During one visit, he asked Timothy a question he had been thinking about for weeks. He asked the boy how he knew these things before they happened. Timothy looked at him quietly. Then he gave an answer that made the doctor uneasy. The boy said he did not exactly know the future. Instead, he said he could hear moments before they arrived. The doctor frowned, unsure what the strange explanation meant. Timothy tried to explain further. He said time felt like a river flowing around him. Sometimes small pieces of that river drifted close enough for him to see them before they reached everyone else. Dr. Hargrove wrote these words carefully in his notebook. Yet the explanation did not make scientific sense. Weeks passed. Then Timothy made another prediction. This time, the warning frightened the entire town. One afternoon, while walking with his brother near the road, Timothy suddenly stopped and looked toward the town square in the distance. He told his brother that a man would soon fall from the church tower. His brother laughed nervously and told him to stop talking like that. But 3 days later, a worker repairing the church roof slipped and fell from the tower. The man survived but suffered serious injuries. After that incident, fear began spreading more quickly than curiosity. Parents told their children to stay away from the Caldwell farm. Some people refused to pass near the property at all. Samuel Caldwell felt the pressure building around his family. The peaceful life he had known was disappearing. He began thinking about leaving the area entirely. But before he could make that decision, something happened that would turn the mystery of Timothy Caldwell into something far darker. One cold evening, in late winter, Timothy woke his mother suddenly. He was sitting upright in his bed, his eyes wide open. Ruth asked him what was wrong. The boy spoke only one sentence. He said someone was coming for him. His mother tried to calm him, believing it was only a nightmare. But Timothy shook his head slowly. He said the man had already started the journey. The next day, strangers arrived in town asking questions about the boy. And one of those strangers carried a reputation that made people uneasy. He was a traveling investigator who studied unusual human abilities. But many people believed he was not searching for knowledge. They believed he was searching for something far more dangerous. And he had come a very long way to find Timothy Caldwell. The boy science could not explain was about to face the most terrifying chapter of his life. The stranger arrived in the town on a cold gray morning when the sky hung low and heavy over the hills. A thin mist drifted across the dirt road as his carriage rolled slowly toward the center of town. People who happened to be walking near the general store paused to watch the unfamiliar visitor. The man stepped down from the carriage with quiet confidence. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dark coat that looked expensive compared to the clothing worn by most farmers in the area. His sharp eyes moved across the buildings of the town as if he were studying every detail. Soon word spread that the stranger was asking questions. But he was not asking about crops, land, or business. He was asking about Timothy Caldwell. Some people hesitated before answering him. Others eagerly shared the strange stories they had heard about the boy. Within only a few hours, the visitor had learned nearly everything the town believed about Timothy. His name was Professor Edwin Carver. Carver claimed he was a researcher who studied rare human conditions. He told people that unusual abilities often had natural explanations if they were examined carefully. Yet something about the way he spoke made many people uncomfortable. He asked too many questions, and he listened too carefully. By the afternoon, Professor Carver was standing at the gate of the Caldwell farm. Samuel Caldwell saw the stranger approaching from the porch and felt an immediate sense of unease. He had grown tired of visitors who treated his son like some kind of curiosity. Samuel stepped down from the porch and blocked the gate. Carver removed his hat politely. He introduced himself as a man of science who wished to speak with the boy. Samuel shook his head. He told the stranger that his family had already been bothered enough by curious visitors. But Carver did not leave. Instead, he calmly explained that Timothy's condition might represent a discovery that could change the understanding of the human mind. He promised that he only wished to observe the boy. Nothing more. Samuel hesitated. At that moment, Ruth Caldwell appeared at the doorway of the house with Timothy standing beside her. The boy was watching the stranger carefully. For several long seconds, Timothy said nothing. Then he quietly spoke. He told his father that the man should come inside. Samuel turned toward his son in surprise. Timothy rarely spoke directly to strangers, but the boy's expression was calm. Reluctantly, Samuel stepped aside and allowed Professor Carver to enter the house. The meeting that followed would later be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. Carver began asking Timothy simple questions. He asked how often the boy slept. Timothy answered that he slept very little. He asked whether Timothy heard voices or saw visions. Timothy shook his head. Then Carver asked the question that interested him most. He asked the boy how he knew things before they happened. Timothy stared at the man quietly. Then he said something that caused the room to fall silent. The boy said the man already knew the answer. Carver frowned. Timothy continued speaking. He said the professor had traveled through 3 towns before reaching theirs. He said the man had written notes about 6 other unusual children in different states. And he said none of those children had shown the same abilities. Carver's face slowly lost its calm expression. Everything Timothy had said was true. No one in the town could have known those details. Yet the boy had spoken them easily. The professor leaned forward slowly. For the first time, his voice sounded serious. He asked Timothy if the boy could see the future clearly. Timothy shook his head. He explained again that he did not see the future the way people imagine. Instead, he felt moments before they happened, like faint echoes arriving early. Carver took careful notes in a small leather book. But inside his mind, another thought had begun forming. If Timothy's ability was real, the boy might represent something science had never seen before, a mind capable of sensing time itself. Over the next several days, Professor Carver remained at the Caldwell farm studying Timothy closely. He asked hundreds of questions. He observed the boy during the day and sometimes even watched him during the night. And slowly Carver began realizing something troubling. The boy was not pretending. Timothy's behavior could not be explained by imagination or trickery. Yet the professor was not the only person growing concerned. The townspeople had begun whispering again. Some believed the stranger had come to take Timothy away. Others feared the attention surrounding the boy would bring trouble upon the entire town. Then something happened that no one expected. One night, Timothy woke suddenly and walked into the room where Professor Carver was sleeping. The boy's face looked pale in the dim lantern light. Carver sat up quickly. He asked what was wrong. Timothy spoke only one sentence. He said the professor must leave the town immediately. Carver asked why. The boy's answer chilled the room. Timothy said something terrible would happen the next morning. Carver demanded to know what the boy meant, but Timothy refused to explain further. He simply repeated that the professor should leave before sunrise. Carver hesitated. A part of him wanted to dismiss the warning. Yet another part of his mind remembered every prediction Timothy had made so far. By dawn, the professor had packed his belongings. He left the town quickly, still uncertain whether he had just escaped danger or abandoned the greatest discovery of his career. But only a few hours after he departed, a terrible accident occurred in the town square. And the event would cause people to speak about Timothy Caldwell for generations. Because once again, the boy had known something no one else could see coming. And even Professor Carver would later admit something he had never believed possible. There were mysteries in the human mind that science had not yet learned how to explain. The morning after Professor Carver left the town began quietly, just like many mornings before it. The sky was pale and clear, and farmers were already working their fields as the sun slowly climbed over the hills. Nothing about the day appeared unusual. Yet inside the Caldwell home, a strange tension filled the air. Ruth Caldwell could not stop thinking about the words Timothy had spoken during the night. The boy had never looked so serious before. His warning had been calm, but the fear in his eyes had been impossible to ignore. Samuel Caldwell tried to push the thoughts away. He believed the strange visitor had simply frightened the boy with too many questions and too much attention. But Timothy himself remained silent. He sat by the window watching the distant road that led toward town. Hours passed. Then, just before midday, the quiet calm of the town was shattered by the sound of shouting. People began running toward the town square. A terrible accident had happened. The blacksmith shop, which stood near the center of town, had exploded after a barrel of gunpowder stored inside the building suddenly ignited. The blast shook the nearby houses and shattered windows across the square. Smoke filled the air. Several men working inside the shop were badly injured. If Professor Carver had remained in town as he originally planned, he would have been standing only a few steps away from the building when the explosion occurred. News of the accident reached the Caldwell farm within minutes. Samuel Caldwell stood frozen when he heard the story. Slowly, he turned toward Timothy. The boy was still sitting quietly beside the window. Samuel asked him how he had known something terrible would happen. Timothy gave the same answer he had given many times before. He said he simply felt the moment before it arrived. The accident became the final event that convinced many people the boy possessed something no one could understand. But the mystery did not bring peace. Instead, it brought fear. Some people believed Timothy's strange awareness meant he had been touched by something supernatural. Others feared that the boy's presence might somehow attract disaster. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the boy caused the events he predicted. Others insisted he was simply able to sense danger before anyone else. Arguments broke out among neighbors. The once peaceful town had become divided. Samuel Caldwell could see that the situation was becoming dangerous for his family. People who had once greeted him warmly now looked at him with suspicion. Children were warned not to go near the Caldwell farm. Even the local minister began speaking more cautiously about the boy during church gatherings. Finally, Samuel made a decision. He would move his family away from the town. Within a few weeks, the Caldwell family packed their belongings into a wagon and prepared to leave the countryside where Timothy had grown up. Very few neighbors came to say goodbye. Most people simply watched from a distance as the wagon rolled slowly down the dusty road. Timothy sat quietly beside his mother during the journey. For the first time in many months, the boy seemed calm. As the hills of the town faded behind them, Ruth Caldwell gently asked her son a question. She asked if the strange feelings he experienced would ever stop. Timothy looked out across the open fields. Then he gave an answer that left his mother silent. He said the feelings were becoming quieter, as if the moments he once sensed were slowly moving farther away. Over time, the Caldwell family settled in another region where few people knew their story. Without the attention and fear that had surrounded him before, Timothy's strange abilities appeared to fade. He began sleeping normally. He worked beside his father and grew into adulthood like any other young man. The strange predictions slowly stopped. Yet the mystery of the boy who had once known events before they happened was never fully explained. Years later, Professor Edwin Carver published a short account of his encounter with Timothy Caldwell in a scientific journal. In his report, he admitted something that surprised many of his colleagues. He wrote that during his career, he had studied many unusual medical conditions. But the Caldwell boy remained the only case he had never been able to explain. Some readers dismissed the story as exaggerated folklore. Others believed Timothy had possessed a rare mental ability that science had not yet discovered. But for the people who had lived in that small Tennessee town during the year 1867, the memory of the boy remained unforgettable. They remembered the quiet child who rarely slept, the boy who spoke calmly about events that had not yet happened, the boy who once warned a stranger to leave town before disaster struck. Even many years later, older residents would sometimes tell the story to younger generations. And whenever they reached the final part of the tale, they always said the same thing. Some mysteries are simply beyond explanation. Thank you for listening to this story on Story of the Black Past. If you enjoyed this mysterious historical story, Please subscribe to the channel and like the video so more people can discover stories like this. Before you leave, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your country, and the time you watched this story. And remember, sometimes the strangest stories from history are the ones that leave us with questions science still cannot answer. Years passed, and the story of Timothy Caldwell slowly faded from the place where it first began. The town that once whispered about the strange boy returned to its ordinary rhythm of farming seasons, church gatherings, and quiet evenings. New families moved in, old buildings were repaired. The explosion at the blacksmith's shop became just another memory of the past. But the mystery of Timothy Caldwell did not completely disappear. Some of the people who had known the boy during those strange months in 1867 continued telling the story to their children and grandchildren. Around fireplaces during cold winters, older residents sometimes spoke about the quiet boy who could sense events before they happened. Each person remembered him a little differently. Some described Timothy as a gentle child who carried a burden he did not understand. Others believed he had possessed a rare and powerful gift that frightened people who could not explain it. Years later, Professor Edwin Carver also continued thinking about the boy. Although he had studied many unusual cases during his career, the encounter with Timothy Caldwell remained the one that troubled him the most. The professor had built his reputation on the belief that every mystery of the human mind could eventually be explained through careful study. But Timothy's case did not fit any known scientific theory. Carver reviewed the notes he had written during his stay at the Caldwell farm many times. The pages contained detailed observations about Timothy's sleep patterns, his calm personality, and the strange way he described sensing moments before they happened. The professor eventually published another report about the case. In that report, he made a surprising statement. He wrote that human understanding of the mind was still in its earliest stages. He suggested that there might be abilities hidden within the human brain that science had not yet discovered. Carver did not claim that Timothy possessed supernatural powers, but he admitted that the boy seemed capable of perceiving patterns of events in ways no one had previously documented. His report attracted curiosity among a small number of scientists and doctors. Yet without further evidence or additional cases like Timothy's, the story remained only an unusual historical record. Meanwhile, Timothy Caldwell continued living a quiet life far from the town where the mystery had begun. As he grew older, the strange feelings that had once filled his childhood became weaker and less frequent. Eventually, they disappeared completely. Timothy married and raised a family of his own. He worked as a farmer, just like his father had done. People who met him during adulthood would never have guessed that he had once been the center of such a strange story. He rarely spoke about the events of his childhood. When someone occasionally asked him about the rumors, Timothy usually smiled politely and said he had simply been a child with a vivid imagination. But those who had witnessed the events in 1867 never fully accepted that explanation. They remembered too many moments that could not easily be dismissed. The storm that destroyed the Miller family's house, the accident at the church tower, the explosion in the blacksmith's shop, and the warning that saved Professor Carver's life. Decades later, when Timothy Caldwell passed away peacefully at an old age, a small newspaper printed a short article about his life. The article mentioned that he had once been known as the boy science could not explain. The story briefly returned to public attention again. Some readers believed the events had been exaggerated over time. Others wondered whether Timothy had possessed an ability that modern science might someday understand. Today, historians who study strange events from the past sometimes come across the case of Timothy Caldwell while researching unexplained phenomena from the 19th century. Because the story was recorded by a doctor and a scientific researcher, it remains one of the more curious historical accounts from that period. But even today, there is no clear explanation. Was Timothy simply an observant child who noticed small signs others missed? Did coincidence make his predictions appear more accurate than they really were? Or did he truly experience moments in a way that science has not yet learned how to measure? No one knows. And that is why the story continues to fascinate people more than a century later. The mystery of Timothy Caldwell reminds us that even in an age of science and discovery, the human mind still holds secrets we do not fully understand. Thank you once again for watching Story of the Black Past. If you enjoyed this mysterious historical story, please subscribe to the channel and like the video so more people can discover forgotten stories like this. Before you leave, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time you watched this story. And remember, history is full of mysteries that continue to challenge what we believe we know about the world. Even after Timothy Caldwell passed away, the mysteries surrounding his childhood continued traveling quietly through history. Stories like his have a strange way of surviving long after the people involved are gone. Sometimes they remain hidden in old letters, journals, and small newspaper archives that few people ever read. Nearly 30 years after the events of 1867, an interesting discovery was made. A young historian researching strange historical reports in Tennessee came across a collection of medical notes written by Professor Edwin Carver. These papers had been stored in an old university archive and had not been examined for many years. Inside the collection were several pages describing the Caldwell case. The historian noticed that Carver's notes were far more detailed than the short reports he had published publicly. The professor had carefully recorded every prediction Timothy had made during the days he spent observing the boy. Some of the predictions had never even been discussed outside the Caldwell home. For example, one page described an event Timothy mentioned during one of Carver's late-night conversations with him. The boy had calmly told the professor that a train accident would occur somewhere in the region before the end of the year. Carver had written the statement down, but had not taken it seriously at the time. However, 2 months later, a train derailment occurred on a railway line about 15 miles away from the town. The accident had been reported briefly in local newspapers, but the connection to Timothy's prediction had never been widely known. Another note described Timothy waking suddenly one evening and telling his mother that the professor would not stay in the town long. At the time, Carver believed the boy had simply guessed that the tension in the town would eventually force him to leave. But when the explosion happened in the town square only hours after he departed, the professor had begun wondering whether Timothy's warning had been something more than a guess. The historian who discovered these notes found himself fascinated by the case. He decided to search for additional records from the time period. Old newspaper archives confirmed several details about the events described in Carver's notes. The storm that destroyed the Miller family's house had been recorded in regional weather reports. The accident at the church tower had been mentioned in a church bulletin. Even the explosion at the blacksmith shop had appeared in a small article printed in a neighboring county newspaper. Piece by piece, the historian realized something important. The strange events surrounding Timothy Caldwell were not simply stories passed down through rumors. Many of them had actually been documented at the time. Yet none of these records offered a clear explanation. The historian eventually published his own article about the case in a journal dedicated to unusual historical phenomena. In the article, he carefully presented the known facts. He described Timothy as a child who appeared physically and mentally normal, according to medical examinations. He explained that the boy rarely slept and sometimes spoke about events before they occurred. The historian did not claim that Timothy possessed supernatural powers. Instead, he raised an intriguing question. What if the human brain occasionally developed abilities that were extremely rare and difficult to study? What if Timothy had been one of those rare cases? Even today, scientists continue studying how the human brain processes time, memory, and patterns of information. Some researchers believe the brain is capable of detecting subtle signals from the environment that people normally overlook. It is possible that Timothy's mind was unusually sensitive to such signals. Perhaps he noticed tiny changes in weather conditions before storms formed. Perhaps he recognized small risks in situations that later led to accidents. Or perhaps the explanations lie somewhere deeper within the mysteries of human perception. No one has been able to prove any single theory. And so the story of Timothy Caldwell remains exactly what it has always been. A mystery. A story about a quiet boy living in a small Tennessee town during the year 1867. A boy who rarely slept. A boy who sometimes spoke about events before they happened. A boy who once warned a traveling professor to leave town before disaster struck. Whether his strange awareness came from unusual intelligence, rare perception, coincidence, or something science still does not understand, Timothy Caldwell left behind a question that continues to intrigue historians even today. Thank you again for spending this time with us on Story of the Black Past. If you enjoy mysterious historical stories like this one, Please subscribe to the channel and like this video so more people can discover these fascinating moments from the past. And before you go, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time you watched this story. Because here on Story of the Black Past, every forgotten story reminds us that history is often stranger than fiction. As the years continued to pass, the mystery of Timothy Caldwell slowly moved from living memory into the strange space between history and legend. Stories about the boy began appearing in unexpected places. Small magazines that focused on unusual historical events sometimes mentioned his case when discussing unexplained human abilities. But what made the Caldwell story different from many other strange tales was the simple fact that several parts of it had been written down by educated men who believed in science. Professor Edwin Carver had never been a man who believed easily in superstition. His entire career had been built on studying human behavior with careful observation and logic. Yet even he had admitted in his notes that Timothy Caldwell was unlike any case he had ever seen. One sentence from his private journal became especially famous among historians who later studied the documents. Carver wrote that the boy did not behave like someone pretending to predict the future. Instead, he behaved like someone who simply noticed events arriving earlier than everyone else. The professor never fully explained what he meant by that sentence, but many people have tried to interpret it. Some modern psychologists who later read the report suggested that Timothy may have had an extremely rare form of pattern recognition. The human brain is constantly analyzing small signals in the environment such as sounds, weather changes, or human behavior. Most people notice these signals only after something obvious happens. But a mind that processes patterns unusually quickly might detect danger or change before others become aware of it. For example, a sudden shift in wind pressure might signal an approaching storm long before clouds appear in the sky. The creaking of wood in an old structure might warn of an accident before it happens. Perhaps Timothy's brain was unusually skilled at detecting such patterns. Yet even this theory could not explain every detail in the story. Some of Timothy's warnings seemed far too specific. The train accident mentioned in Carver's notes had occurred many miles away. There was no clear environmental signal that could have reached the boy. Because of these unanswered questions, the story continued attracting curiosity long after the people involved had passed away. In the early 1900s, a small group of researchers interested in human perception attempted to investigate similar cases. They searched for individuals who might possess unusual awareness of events, but none of the cases they studied showed the same combination of behavior described in Timothy Caldwell's childhood. The story remained unique. Some people believed the mystery would eventually be solved as science advanced. Others believed the explanation might always remain beyond human understanding. Interestingly, one of the last recorded references to the Caldwell case appeared nearly 60 years after the events of 1867. An elderly man who had lived in the original Tennessee town during Timothy's childhood gave an interview to a local newspaper. He had been only a small boy at the time, but remembered seeing Timothy several times. The reporter asked him whether the stories about the strange child had been exaggerated over the years. The old man thought carefully before answering. Then he said something that readers never forgot. He said the boy had never seemed frightening. He had simply seemed tired, as if his mind was always listening to something that the rest of the world could not hear. The man added that Timothy rarely spoke unless someone asked him a question. And when he did speak, he sounded completely certain about what he was saying. Not proud, not dramatic, just calm. The interview ended with the old man repeating the same words that had been said in the town many decades earlier. Some mysteries are simply beyond explanation. Today, the name Timothy Caldwell appears occasionally in books and articles that explore unusual historical events. Some authors describe him as an example of unexplained human intuition. Others believe the story reflects how people in earlier centuries interpreted coincidence and observation. But regardless of which explanation someone believes, the story continues to spark curiosity. Because the idea that a human mind might occasionally perceive time differently is both fascinating and unsettling. If Timothy Caldwell truly sensed moments before they arrived, even for a brief period of his life, it would mean the human brain might still hold abilities that modern science has not fully discovered. And perhaps somewhere in the world today there are other minds quietly experiencing similar moments without realizing how unusual they are. Thank you once again for joining us on Story of the Black Past. We hope you enjoyed this mysterious historical story. If you like stories about strange moments in history, forgotten mysteries, and unexplained events, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. And before you leave, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time you watch this story. Because sometimes the past leaves behind mysteries that continue whispering across generations. Even today, long after the 19th century faded into history, the story of Timothy Caldwell continues to quietly appear in discussions about the strange limits of the human mind. Every generation that hears the story seems to ask the same question. Was Timothy Caldwell simply an unusually observant child, or was he something far more mysterious? Historians who study the case often begin by looking at the time period in which the events happened. The year 1867 came shortly after the American Civil War. Many communities in the southern United States were still recovering from years of conflict and uncertainty. Small towns were filled with people who lived close to nature. They paid attention to weather, animals, and the subtle rhythms of the land. Because of this, some historians believe people during that time may have been more sensitive to environmental signals than many modern city dwellers. This theory suggests that Timothy may have been extremely skilled at reading tiny clues in the world around him. For example, farmers often learned to recognize approaching storms by changes in wind, temperature, and even the behavior of birds or insects. A child growing up in such an environment might naturally develop a heightened awareness of these patterns. But again, this explanation does not fully solve the mystery. Even the most observant person could not easily predict events such as distant accidents or specific moments like the explosion in the town square. This is where the mystery becomes deeper. Some modern neuroscientists who have examined historical cases like Timothy's suggest another possibility. They believe the human brain may process time in more complex ways than we currently understand. Most people experience time in a steady, forward flow. Moments arrive one after another in a predictable order. But scientists studying perception have discovered that the brain actually predicts events constantly. When you catch a falling object or step out of the way of a moving bicycle, your brain is already predicting what will happen a fraction of a second before it occurs. Without these predictions, simple actions would be impossible. Some researchers have wondered whether certain rare individuals might experience these predictions in a stronger or more extended way. Instead of predicting events only fractions of a second ahead, perhaps their brains briefly extend that window further. Not minutes or hours into the future, but just far enough to notice the early shape of events forming. If something like this ever occurred in Timothy Caldwell's mind, it might explain why he often described his experience as feeling moments arrive early. Of course, this idea remains only a theory. There has never been another well-documented case exactly like Timothy's. And without living evidence to study, scientists cannot test the idea directly. But this possibility keeps the mystery alive. Sometimes historians return to the simplest explanation of all. Perhaps the story of Timothy Caldwell survived because it represents something deeply human. Throughout history, people have always been fascinated by the idea that time might not be as simple as it appears. Ancient cultures told stories of prophets and seers who could glimpse the future. Modern science fiction imagines technologies that allow people to travel through time. The idea that a quiet boy in a small farming town once experienced time differently touches that same deep curiosity. Whether the explanation lies in coincidence, extraordinary observation, or something science has not yet discovered, the story of Timothy Caldwell continues to remind us of an important truth. The human mind remains one of the greatest mysteries in existence. Even today, scientists are still learning how memory works, how dreams form, and how consciousness itself arises. If the mind can create thoughts, imagination, emotions, and awareness, perhaps there are still abilities hidden within it, waiting to be understood. Timothy Caldwell may have simply been a rare glimpse of that possibility. Or he may have been something else entirely. That is why historians still refer to his story with the same title that appeared in an old newspaper many years ago. The boy science could not explain. Thank you for listening to this mysterious historical story here on the Story of the Black Past. If you enjoy stories about strange events, forgotten history, and real mysteries from the past, please subscribe to the channel and like this video so more people can discover these fascinating stories. Before you leave, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time you watched this video. Because here on Story of the Black Past, every forgotten story reminds us that history is often far more mysterious than we imagine. Even though more than a century has passed since the strange events surrounding Timothy Caldwell, the story still leaves historians and curious readers with one final thought. What if the real mystery was not only Timothy himself, but how people reacted to him? When the boy first began speaking about events before they happened, the people in his town responded in very different ways. Some believed he had been blessed with a gift. Others feared he might be connected to something dark or unnatural. And a few, like Professor Edwin Carver, tried to understand him through science and careful observation. These reactions reveal something important about human nature. When people encounter something they cannot easily explain, they usually search for answers through the beliefs they already understand. Some turn to religion, others turn to science. Some rely on stories or traditions passed down through generations. But sometimes none of those explanations feel complete. The case of Timothy Caldwell sits exactly in that strange space between explanation and mystery. It reminds us that history is not always filled with clear answers. Sometimes history simply records events as they happened and leaves the deeper meaning for future generations to consider. Over time, the town where Timothy once lived changed completely. New buildings replaced the old wooden structures. Roads were widened and railways connected the region to larger cities. Very few people living there today know the full story of the quiet boy who once caused so much curiosity and fear. But occasionally, someone researching local history discovers a reference to the strange events of 1867. They might find an old newspaper clipping describing the explosion in the town square, or they might read a mention of Professor Carver's unusual report about a boy who seemed to sense moments before they arrived. When those discoveries happen, the story briefly returns to life again, and people begin asking the same question that has followed Timothy Caldwell for generations. Was he simply a child who made lucky guesses at the right moments? Was he an unusually perceptive observer of the world around him? Or did his mind experience time in a way that most humans never do? No matter which explanation someone believes, the story carries a quiet lesson. Human knowledge is always growing, but it is never complete. Every century, people discover new truths about the world that earlier generations could not imagine. Ideas that once seemed impossible later become understood through science and discovery. Perhaps one day the mystery of Timothy Caldwell will also find its explanation. Or perhaps his story will remain one of those rare historical moments that remind us how much there is still left to learn. Either way, the boy who lived in a small Tennessee town during the year 1867 left behind a question that continues echoing through time. A question about the hidden potential of the human mind, and a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are found in the quiet lives of ordinary people. Thank you for joining us once again here on Story of the Black Past. If you enjoyed this mysterious journey into forgotten history, please subscribe to the channel and like this video so more people can discover these fascinating stories. Before you go, write in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time you watched this story. And remember, sometimes the past holds mysteries that still challenge the limits of science and imagination.